ladies and gentlemen. Welcome back to our third section. So the topic of this panel is social entrepreneurship, harness commerce for a good cause. Entrepreneurships aren't always concerned about profits. There are many people that do their business to create social value while making money. So is there any conflicts between profits and social impact? We'll know more about this. So it is my pleasure to introduce the speaker of this panel to you all. They are Mr. Shek, Asia Lead of Social Innovation Exchange, Ms. Dorothy Lam, co-founder and chief catalyst of Dream Impact, and Mr. Warren Luk, CEO of Good Lab. And the moderator of this session, Ms. Jocelyn Matyas, Virtual Development Lead of SecondMuse from Singapore. So I'll pass my time to Jocelyn.
Thanks, guys, so much. It is so wonderful to meet you all today. So we have a wonderful panel with us with vast experience with social entrepreneurship. And I realize that for many of you watching, some of you are very aware of the sector and the trends within the sector and the growth of the sector in recent years especially. But before we, understanding that some of you may not and the sector might be new, we're actually going to get started with some general kind of discussions about what the sector is. And before we move into some more in-depth questions about, commerce for good, the business case of social entrepreneurship, and some other of those more deeper detailed questions. So we'll get started with a question for the full panel. So we'll go in the order of Dorothy, Marco, Warren. So social entrepreneurship has been a really common term in this ecosystem now for almost a decade. And in this time, it's evolved. I would love to kick things off today by hearing from each of you how you define social entrepreneurship, or in your opinion, what makes an entrepreneur a social entrepreneur? So I'll start with you, Dorothy.
Sure. And I think what's most important is combining the two concepts of social and entrepreneurship, even though it seems like they're both on really different ends. Being social-minded means that for us, definitely empathetic. And I'm sure Marco and Warren would agree on this, that it's really about understanding other people and how they feel, that everything we do have an impact, whether it's positive or negative, and that we have to be conscious of every decision we make. But in order to be conscious, we have to be empathetic and to understand that the world is interconnected, that every action we do has a ripple effect. So that's definitely the first step, thinking beyond your own realm. Secondly, to be an entrepreneur for us is about daring to dream, because you need to dream big to change the system. And there are many flaws in the system right now, from personal levels to community level to a macro global level. But we really have to believe that there can be change. We need to dare to think big. And lastly, I would say to take strategic risk, because to be an entrepreneur, you have to be strategic, but you also have to be risk-taking and actually make those dreams happen. Yeah.
Great. What about you, Mark?
To me, social entrepreneurship, I would say it's a mindset. A mindset that everyone should harness. To me, social entrepreneurs are like people who fall in love with the issues. Saying fall in love means they're passionate about the social issues, that they are thinking about new solutions or new ways of working to try to tackle it. And to me, they can create a new organizations, maybe a social enterprise to do it, or they can act as entrepreneurs with their own organization, either in corporates or in the communities to create social change. So to me, it is a mindset that people embrace, and they are looking for solutions or new ways to address it. So to me, that's social entrepreneurship.
Right, it's my turn, I guess. Thank you for the question. I guess my understanding or interpretation is very similar to Dorothy and Marco's. How do I put it? I think social and entrepreneurship is like a model to run either a nonprofit or for-profit organization with a purpose to deliver social good and business returns in parallel. Now, based on this context, I guess social entrepreneur usually has all the typical characteristics or qualities that a traditional startup entrepreneur would have, except a social entrepreneur tend to have a social issue in mind that he or she would love or would like to address through the business operations. And that's how I differentiate social entrepreneur versus traditional business entrepreneur.
And also, I think to add to that, kind of a more nuanced definition would also be kind of, is it impact first or is it business first? And I think those are often, people think it's a sacrifice, one or the other, but it's, I think it's important that social entrepreneurship, it's really about a business built around to solve a social issue. Whereas I think other definitions like benefit corporations, B Corp, it's more a regular business in any industry that can have a social aspect to it, that they are beneficial to society, to environment, to their employees, etc. So there are kind of two different approaches or lenses to it as well. And their priorities as a business is your priority to be a commercial business in scale and have that side financial returns and also have an impact, or is your business designed around solving a specific social issue?
Yeah. Definitely. So having that social and environmental impact at the core, not in the periphery of your business model and your business plan. So personally, I've been in the social entrepreneurship space for almost over 8 years, and it's really through a global community. So specifically, the last 5 years I spent with the social entrepreneurship community here in Asia. And I'm not going to answer my own question, but something about the characteristics, the qualities, and the people in Asia makes this an especially vibrant and viable community. I'd love to hear from you three on what characteristics and qualities in the people and in the environment and in life in Asia do you think really make social entrepreneurship unique or have a really strong value proposition here in Asia? Well, let's go the opposite way around. I'm going to start with Warren, then we'll go there.
Sure. I was thinking about that as well. I think Asia is very special in the way that it is very culturally and economically diverse. And that means, they are developed countries and they are developing countries. In light of that, there are actually also a lot of common social and environmental problems, from education to poverty to healthcare, for example. But what I'm trying to say is that many social entrepreneurs now we see in Asia, especially the younger generations, actually have emerged and trying to solve these common issues, typically through in-country collaborations or even cross-border collaborations. One of the social entrepreneurs that I've met with, he's a Hong Kong-based guy and a social innovator from Hong Kong who has traveled to Myanmar and set up a community-based crowdsourcing platform over there to raise funds for local infrastructure. And the organization is called Community. But from this particular example, what I see is that social entrepreneurship and social innovation now tends to be expanding across border and people. And I do see there is an expanding and increasingly diverse and dynamic ecosystem across the region where people would do things not just locally in a particular country, but also think about leveraging resources from outside the countries. And that's how I see social entrepreneurship or social innovation is different to some of the other regions around the globe.
And by adding to what Warren has mentioned, I think in Asia, particularly in Southeast Asia, I think people in the social entrepreneurship scene, normally or they have a tendency to use social enterprise or social entrepreneurship to tackle development issues, which is very unique in a way that even governments use this social entrepreneurship or social enterprise policy to address these rural area issues. And I think that is something that's very interesting for us to see. And I think talk about people, there's one thing I found it very interesting. The concept of social entrepreneurship, social innovation, we are heavily influenced by like UK, Europe, or US, but the adaptation, the way of working is so unique. In Asia, we always in a mix. Like we're influenced by the West, but at the same time we have a rich cultural foundation. So we honor a lot of collectivism, and in a way that, and also we put a lot of effort or emphasis on actions. So we do things really fast. We try. One of the things I would say, one of the characters that our social entrepreneurs or innovators are relatively weak at storytelling. So that is something that we do a lot, but we don't tell people like what we're doing. So I think that is something that I found it very interesting, and that is something I would love to explore on how we understand the way of working and the Asia social innovation narrative that we are trying to build on our own. And maybe in the future, like people from the Europe or US will come and learn from us, since we have developed for most of our cities are very crowded, densely populated. So some of the issues they will sooner or later experience like us, and we are experimenting much earlier than them. So that is something that I found it very interesting.
Oh, wow, that's, and I think also in Asia, we also have values like family and community that's very, very strong. I think our sense of home and our sense of bonding with people is very core to who we are and what we do. And I think, so also comparing business models in Asia, there are also a lot more family businesses, family offices that have this concept of passing on heritage of values that and the humanitarian values to be passed on from generations to generations. And I think that lives through enterprises and businesses and also family foundations, and also in how we build communities. So on the other dimension, other than family, is also how we treat other people in the community and the collective mindset. I think, as Marco mentioned, it's really also core in this region, I think. Yeah.
Completely. I'd love to dive a little bit deeper into that. I can completely agree with what all of you said, but especially I think maybe I'll riff off of what you were saying, Dorothy. And it's really interesting because there's many social entrepreneurs in Asia I've met whom, when I say you're a social entrepreneur, they're like, what do you mean? They didn't self-identify with that phrase, especially entrepreneurs that aren't necessarily of the younger generations. And to them, they were humbly just solving an issue they saw and being resourceful. And I think the one thing that's really, characteristics in this region are community for sure, and the importance of community, and also just resourcefulness. And those together, could very easily build a social enterprise. So something I'd love to kind of dive deeper in, Dorothy, is what you're talking about with community. I've even heard a lot in this space, social entrepreneurs saying, I don't necessarily think of my market as a market. I think of it as my community, and I build relationships with them. And that, therefore, they'll never let my business fail. So, Dorothy, I'd love to hear a little bit more of your input on what role community plays in social entrepreneurship, and really also how community development is so central to building a social entrepreneurship ecosystem.
Yeah, that's so true. And I think also something that we talk about a lot is that we're not looking at the competitive landscape, but we're looking at the collaborative landscape. Yes, there are other organizations that do what we do in Dream Impact, but like Good Lab or Social Innovation Exchange, we're not saying they're competitors, but hey, we can collaborate because we really need to make a greater impact. And if we spend all the time differentiating ourselves and like competing against each other, whether through price or it's really and stealing each other's talents, it's really not going to help the industry. We really need to collaborate and build this bigger force and join forces and build a bigger community. And the role of community is really about trust. And for us, we've been around for 3 years, and we've really seen our community support us through this COVID time. And that like a lot of businesses would, have trouble with their revenue streams or their business, but our partners stuck with us and they didn't leave us. And, they kept us in the loop, and like we collaborated on projects, and like they would check in with us, we would check in with them. And even that spirit of support is so important. We're not left to our own devices and like flounder, but we were there to support each other. And I think, especially in COVID times, community, we also did that in a digital form. People really needed to bond with each other, and that we maintained that human relationships. That a few of the founders were feeling very stressed and very, uncertain of the future, that we were able to bond digitally, remotely as well, to maintain that relationship. And so it's not always about business development. It's not that how is this relationship going to bring me short-term revenue, but it's really bringing in the long-term impact and that ecosystem, that support network that will be resilient and grow in the future. So that's also, in building community, is also shifting that mindset from I'm looking at a short-term transactional relationship to I am building a long-term growing together mindset, so that it's become this collective force.
Yeah, great. So I'm going to shift to talking a little bit more about the business side of social entrepreneurship. Warren, I guess this is a question for you. As someone with a background in finance economics, and I know you began your career in Deloitte working in the traditional corporate world, the title of this session is Social Entrepreneurship, Commerce for a Good Cause. So I'd love to hear from you, what is the business case for social entrepreneurship?
Business case. Everyone is interested in that. I think, in my opinion, social enterprises or social entrepreneurship, just like, to be honest, normal traditional businesses, but usually, obviously, like I said earlier, put more emphasis on their social mission instead of profit maximization. That's a very key difference. And social enterprises should be able to self-sustain and survive in the market without philanthropies or external money, meaning that the business operation should be able to generate sufficient revenue to achieve break-even in the medium to long run. Now, I think it is important to understand and appreciate the fact that in an ideal world, there should no longer be a differentiation between so-called social enterprise versus traditional businesses or enterprises. Because, like Dorothy was alluding to it earlier, my hope, and perhaps for many others, is to see more businesses and corporates integrating or identifying social purpose in their operations and business strategies. We have already seen a number of multinational companies who have been doing that and experiencing rapid growth in their market. Patagonia being one of the most sort of classic example of that. They use sustainable fabric and they use that to sort of approach the customer, doing very well in the last 10 years or so. And recently, Green Monday, based in Hong Kong, is also doing something similar. They focus on plant-based food productions and recently raised a lot of money for business expansion. So looking at this various examples and the fact that consumer nowadays, especially the younger generations, they expect more from various business services, they also look into the purpose or mission that are driven or driving the business operations as to determine whether they want to buy certain product or service. And from that, to answer your questions, I definitely see a lot of enormous positive business case for social entrepreneurship and for the growth of potential businesses in the market to leverage the power of that in order to expand their businesses and financial returns.
Yeah, completely. And I think a way that we sometimes talk about it in our spaces, which you were alluding to and saying, you hope that this is the mainstream way business operates sometimes, is I almost feel like social entrepreneurs were ahead of the curve. They saw certain social inequities or environmental unsustainable environmental practices as risk. And they said, I'm going to build a business that, that addresses or mitigates those environmental and social risks that traditional businesses are facing but not acknowledging. And I think something that we saw, especially with COVID, and where we've been seeing that being mainstreamed, is finally businesses are moving social and environmental factors from seeing it as philanthropy and CSR to actually integrating it into risk management for their businesses. And social enterprises are already doing that. They did it in their, the normal core, the business model of their businesses. And I think that's something so interesting just to share in that perspective, which is exactly what you were hitting on.
And sorry, Jocelyn, I want to add something on that. Actually, I think, of course, social entrepreneurs, like they are ahead of the curve. But actually, I think now, actually, like Warren said, like more and more corporates, like more and more business are trying to do good. Of course, because of COVID, but actually, there is a global trend that we see at Six. We are working on a research on like why business do good to understand the motivation. One of the cases I found it very fascinating in Japan. So 7-Eleven, like we all know, like the convenience store, like in those rural area, they are taking their social responsibilities, but as actually leveraging their assets of like their like very convenient location, but trying to tackle the elderly issues, like how to facilitate the elderly who lived in rural area to get access to materials, to get access to services, leveraging their business network. So this is something that actually already has been happening, and I think more and more corporates should adopt this like mindset. And also another one that I found it very interesting from our research, which we'll publish later, but I can tell a little bit here, is that in Hong Kong in particular, the young people, when business do good, they are more willing to work in that company, and the retention rate is higher. So in return, actually, the company are saving a lot more costs in training, in developing talent, and of course they have to be genuine in practice. Of course, they say they're doing good. At the same time, they're really doing good because like consumers and also employers, they have a really like high standard in evaluating your own employers. So that is something that I see, like how corporate or private organizations embrace the concept of social entrepreneurship and still make a business case, leveraging their own business assets, but at the same time achieving social purpose or social impact. So that is something I want to add on.
Amazing. So my next question, that was a follow-up for you as well, Marco. So on that note of talking about how social entrepreneurship may be able to become a bigger movement or move mainstream, there's sometimes a perception, and this especially sits in some parts of Asia and even the US, that social enterprises are small. And when you use the word "I'm a social enterprise," people associate it with your small business. In your experience, is this true? And what support and from whom have you found that is most effective in helping social enterprises scale?
To me, is it true? From our Hong Kong cases, Green Monday definitely not. This is not true. Like they are growing a lot. In like within a decade, 7 to 8 years, they grow up till now and be one of the greatest influencer on like plant-based meats in the world. But to me, actually, going back to your questions, like social enterprise, one of the questions that I have in mind is, do we need social enterprise to scale? Maybe small, like being small, is one of the beauty, because we have much more rooms for experimentation. We have much more room to try new things, to pioneers, and to influence others. Having the lens of like collaborative effort, collective effort, like what Dorothy mentioned. Like with these small organizations, they work together, they form a big community, which will grow and have much bigger impact maybe in the future. So I think this concept of scaling is also using a mindset, a very like business mindset that, okay, we need to scale to a certain size and then we get the market share and then we'll dictate the world. So, but to me, I have a query on, is that the narrative that we should go for social enterprise? Maybe there are beauty of being small but agile and still having the flexibility to try new things. So so that is the first thing I want to say. And the second thing, going back to the questions, of course, some of the social enterprise want to scale. So what support that they often need? I think one of the things for most of the social innovators or social entrepreneurs in Hong Kong, they are so passionate about like the issues. They're so passionate about, oh, I want to find a solution. But somehow, maybe in the process, in the journey, they will find it very hard to master the business skills. Oh, how can I do like accounting better? How can I manage staff better? And how do I manage different resources and stakeholders relations? So that is something. It really depends on the personality of the entrepreneur. But at the same time, if there are external support, for example, mentor, if there are more exchange within the community, within the social entrepreneurship community that they can learn from each other, I think that would help a lot from their own experience and transfer the experience inside, then they can grow and scale eventually. So I think that is something that, because money-wise, I don't think like in Asia, there are so many resources, capital that can support like social enterprise to scale or to further develop. So it's a matter of that kind of like experience exchange, learnings among each other, the learning circles.
Amazing, great. So we are about at time where we're going to open up for questions from the audience. So do feel free, just for simplicity, to post those in the chat feature. I see Yun Lam, we have one from you, which maybe we can get started with while others are typing out their questions in the chat feature. So they ask, my question is, should we start thinking about what values to add to existing businesses rather than starting new businesses to achieve social purposes? Anyone have insight on this?
I think Yun is referring to the Japanese case that I mentioned. Yes, just to address, yes, they set up the stores and then they think of how to add value to the community. So to me, I think for existing organizations or corporates or private sector, they should think about how to leverage their business assets to drive social impact instead of, okay, I will start a new thing to do things. I think it really depends on situation, but I'm sure as a business, because you're serving customers and customer are people, and they're eventually like within your community or neighborhood. So think about the business, you should also think about these stakeholders instead of just the shareholders. So I think for existing businesses, I think they should review and do some audit on how they can add value to the community first, rather than just, okay, I'll start something new. So that is my answer to that question.
Yeah, I totally agree with Marco, because I think, and that's what I've been doing sort of with some of our business partners as well, is to, when determining what value to add in the community or the society, first of all, the first point of contact would be the immediate customers or partners that certain organizations are engaging with. Because by understanding their pain points or challenges, then that might inform what additional value or social purposes that can be injected in certain operations or projects in order to fulfill some unmet needs of those customers or partners. So I guess for businesses, that would be a very first sort of actions that can be done in order to find the value to be included.
Wonderful.
I think just a quick note, I think both is needed, depending on your role and position. If you are in corporate and you feel very comfortable in that structure, that way of working, and you can make decisions, then be an entrepreneur, right? Make those decisions, change policies within the corporate We do need large corporates to change their supply chains. We do need large corporates to change how they hire people in manufacture and production. But if you do find that there is a market gap in a new business, then you can start your own. So it's also what is in need. If you find that no one else, you have a brilliant idea and no one else is doing it, or very few, then do it.
Yeah, wonderful. So we're going to move on to the next question by Alex. How do you suggest to optimize the network of small entrepreneurs in a way that resources are used the most efficiently in terms of impact for the community? We see a lot of misallocation, waste of resources, time, and effort in NGOs and small businesses. Any thoughts, comments to that question?
I think it's definitely about communication and transparency. You have to set aside time to communicate externally. I think we are so focused on, every company is so focused on driving your own strategy, you forget to talk to other people. Right now we're building this alliance, so actually I'm very close with Marco and Warren on other projects that we constantly update each other, like what are we doing, what are some resources you can share, what are some of our needs. So I think it's about that communication. And whether that communication happens online, digitally, on a website, on a board, or is it in person, I think both is needed, but the most important is having that communication mindset.
I would add to that to sort of dissect it into because like everyone knows, I'm an economics major, supply and demand. I think what Dorothy was suggesting is already sort of the supply side, where NGOs, corporates, and interested party having the resources to get together through some sort of platforms or intermediaries and communication. That's very important to understand what we can offer to the communities. But I guess on the demand side, on the other hand, is also very important to have the users or the communities involved and participate in that sort of resources allocation process, so that we know exactly what they need and therefore allocate the relevant and adequate resources to those communities. In some of the work that we do in Good Lab, we're trying to do that and involve people in the communities to participate in a participatory design process for services and products. And I guess in order to sort of minimize misallocation of resources, that would be a very good way to do as well.
I think I had one more question I missed. So this is from Nathan Chan. Is there any research that Hong Kong consumers are spending more on brands with strong social values or to social enterprise products?
I can quickly answer that. We are trying to, so there's one research coming out. We are in the final stage, so I'll share once it's ready. But we did a quantitative survey to the millennials, asking about their consumer behavior. So some of the preliminary insight that I can tell is they tend, in Hong Kong especially, they tend to choose employers with social missions impact. But on consumer products, we don't see much of a differences. But I think it's going to change since in the past few years, like we see people choose to consume or choose to eat in restaurants or companies that they have similar value. So I think that is that's a trend here, and so I'll share the research once it's ready. But we're trying to do something similar.
Great, and maybe Marco, after the session, you can share where they could find this research or link to it appropriately in the chat. Thanks so much. I think we're almost at time, so if we have no additional questions, I feel free to continue to check them. I just want to end with maybe we'll end similarly to the last session. I'd love if you could give one piece of advice to any aspiring social entrepreneurs in our audience. What would that advice be?
I'll say join a social enterprise. because you would know what it's like to be in one and start one, how to operate, what's the strategy, what's the market like if you join one. So before diving deep into like starting your own business, I think the first step would be join one that you like.
And my advice would be to think about the people and the community around you, and try to observe and see the problems or issues they have, and begin small, take baby steps to initiate community-based initiatives, because that gives you, the sense of success, and sort of tap into this space and experience your own mode or style of social entrepreneurship. And I think that's an easy sort of starting point to do.
I agree with Dorothy and Warren. I would like to add another lens is look inward. Like, try to ask yourself why you want to do things like this. And because there are so many opportunities in the world, or in Hong Kong in particular, so start by looking inward and asking why to yourself. It will help you to choose and make decisions. What are the values that you harness most, you embrace most, and you know where to go, and your heart will lead the way. So look inward, think about why, and after you find the connection, and then follow what Warren said, follow what Dorothy said, then you'll have your own unique and beautiful.
Wonderful. Well, Dorothy, Marco, Warren, thank you for spending your time with us and your audience today. It's been a pleasure to feel your energy and your passion for the sector. There has been requests from our audience to share any alliances or networks, which I know many of you are part of or lead here in Hong Kong for social entrepreneurs. So please do share that information in the chat so that everyone can stay involved and engaged in this community. And I think at this point, we hand it back on over. So thank you all so much for your attention and your insights.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, everyone.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Jocelyn, Marco, Dorothy, and Warren. And thanks again to all the panel speakers for this morning. I'm sure all of us has a lot of takeaway. And before the lunch break, it's time for us to have a chance to chat with the startup founders in the next sections. And see you again in 5 minutes.